Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the NACo Tech Exchange webinar that we are partnering with a partner that we have, BioKey, as well as Alameda County. Today's webinar is a practical path to multi-factor authentication, how to secure every single account one step at a time. Before we get started, I do like to go over some housekeeping items, and we are on the Zoom platform today. And so I know many of you are becoming very familiar with Zoom. You are in listen-only mode, and we will have a live Q&A at the end. But what I would ask is that if you have questions, you should have a chat option on your lower hand screen. Click on that chat. Brittany just posted something in the chat as well for you. We're glad to have you today, but post your question there. And depending on how many folks we have here today and how many questions, we will potentially be able to ask you to ask the question directly. And then finally, we are recording this session, and the presentation will be shared following the webinar. So I know we still have some more folks coming in on the waiting room. We'll get started here in just a moment. As I said, thank you so much for being here, and really want this to be interactive. And let me just see if there are any other, I don't think so. I think we're good to go. So today, as I mentioned, we have three lovely ladies, myself included, that will be talking to you about multi-factor authentication, really from a strategy perspective. I'm the CIO for the National Association of Counties, and I really enjoy working with all of you in the county, as well as our partners in the industry. We are fortunate today to have Sybil Gurney with us today. She's the Assistant CIO for Alameda County. And I know Alameda County is a little large, however, she has some great practical advice that is really, I think you'll find beneficial regardless of the size of your county. So I don't want this Alameda County to scare you away here. You'll get to interact with her shortly. And then finally, we have Kimberly Johnson. She's the Vice President of Product for BioKey International. They have a number of multi-factor solutions and approaches, and she really has a heart for the customer. And I think you'll see that shine through as we start this presentation. So those are the three of us today. Just wanted to share from the speaker perspective, and you will have our contact information afterwards. So let me just spend a few moments talking about how this came about in terms of the content. Back in about May timeframe, June timeframe, we've been working to update the NACo platform for technology. And one of the areas that we were a little light on, maybe not as specific as we need to be, was in the area of cybersecurity. We worked with a number of county IT leaders, as well as talking with other national associations, including NACo, the National League of Cities, National Governors Association, and a number of others, just validating what are the priorities in cybersecurity. And from those conversations, we were able to put together a publication. I know many of you have probably seen that. The link is as shared here on the PowerPoint. And it's 11 areas that are extremely important. You'll see in the publication that there's 3 icons. One talks about how much money is involved. If it's all green, then it's a little bit more costly to implement. The second icon is about what are the effects that are the results we get from implementing. If that's all circled in yellow, you know that that's, while it may cost, it's going to save you in the long run because of the benefits it brings to your county. And then the last one is how much effort is it going to take from either your resources or outside resources. And if it's all blue, then that means that it is going to take a good bit of effort to implement. So as you can see, MFA, multi-factor authentication, is at the top of the list. I can't emphasize how important that is. And just this morning, I had a really fast request on how are counties affected by cyber attacks? Quickly put together, short 5-6 bullets of here are examples. And many of those examples came as a result of not having multi-factor authentication in place. We're going to explain it for anyone who might not be clear on what that means in a little bit. But for right now, what I would like to do is to poll all of you as an audience to get a response from you. You'll see the questions on the question on the slide here, but I'm going to bring up the poll in just a minute. Just to refresh you quickly, multi-factor, if I log in and I put my username and password in, it's going to send me a PIN on my phone with a 4-digit number that I have to put into on the screen on the computer. That's multi-factor. There are other ways of doing multi-factor, but that's the easiest one to explain. So let me start the poll, and you'll see we have multi-factor in place for. So do you have that in place for your end users or your end users connecting through VPN? And you should see it now. Do you have it in place for server access? Do you have it in place for citizens? So let me explain that one real quickly. Citizens, if they are coming to your website, are they required to log in before they put additional information into a particular area, whether it's a permit application or anything along those lines? And of course, there's always all of the above or none of the above. So I'll give you another minute here. A lot of you have already responded, and I too, as the person watching, can see the results, and we're almost there. I'm going to go ahead and in about 5 seconds, I'll close the poll. It's fine if you didn't have a chance to respond, but this is really, I think, telling. So you should be able to see that 30% of you have it in place for end users. Another half of you have it in place with the end users connecting through VPN. And that's really important. We've had a number of conversations about that, and it's not always the easiest. And then the server access is a little bit lower. So we have some conversations about that possibly a little later. This is great information for us at a high level to see this, because we know we're not there yet in terms of multi-factor authentication being in place. And our goal today is to give you a starting point and hopefully additional guidance and resources to make that journey. So in order to talk about that journey, what I'd like to do right now is turn it over to Sybil Gurney and let her share the journey that they've been on and how it started when it came to implementing multi-factor authentication. So Sybil, it's all yours.
Hi, I'm Sybil. As Rita said, a little bit about Alameda County. We're here in California. We have about 10,000 employees. We have 1.5 million residents, so we are a bit large, but I think a lot of what we've learned, like Rita said, will even help the small counties. We started with MFA, our journey back in 2018, so I'm going to bring you back to 2018. If you can remember back when, this is actually, MFA was not very popular in the environment, maybe with banking and some other industries, but it wasn't rolled out into many places. So back in 2018, we had just kicked off our digital transformation. We were going to adopt Windows rings, we were going to do patching, we were going to do all of those things. And as we were discussing what our strategy is, ransomware was just attacking everywhere. I'm sure all of you remember Atlantic City. That was a big deal. You know, they didn't pay the ransomware. I don't even know if they had the opportunity to do so. They had to go back to manual processes. I think the CIO got laid off. That was anywhere from a 17 million to a 26 million event. While that was going on, we had all the other events going around in like Davidson County, North Carolina, in the Colorado Department of Transportation got hit twice. And we were just in Texas, we were just hearing states, counties, cities, our local sheriff department, one of our local cities were, all shut down with ransomware. And we were just waiting. We were so concerned that somebody was in our system somewhere just waiting to attack us that, we got very, very nervous. And then over a 3-day weekend in February of that year, we had a very large phishing attack. And you would think on a Sunday morning, on a 3-day weekend in a county, that we would be safe. But lo and behold, let me give you some stats on what happened with that phishing attack. 4,000 people within the county received the email. 390 employees opened the email, and the email was taking them to a link that asked for their credentials. It was like an Oracle form. It looked like logging on to do your timesheet. It was really well done. And they actually entered their credentials. Now, again, this is Sunday morning on a 3-day weekend between, I think, like 5 and 8 a.m. Who would have known, right? And the email, you can't really see it on here, but it was quite clever. It came from a real district attorney within our county. It has this is the only clue. It has the district attorney seal on it, but was for the city of Alameda, not the county of Alameda. And if you don't know your logos, you would have been easily fooled by that. So people thought this email was coming to them from a district attorney with a county seal, asking them to enter their information. And so they did. And, because of this, we knew that we needed to do something. The email itself actually ended up coming from Dubai. So that's important to know, because that played into what our decisioning was. But because of the environment and because of this particular attack, we were almost 100% positive, like I said, that there was somebody in our environment and they're ready to take us down like the other large counties. We knew, being a large county, that we were definitely a target and are still a target. So this, I know Kim is going to talk about assessment and how you assess what you're going to do. We were more in the reactive mode. We were under attack and we had to move fast. So next slide, please. So what did we decide to do? Oh, and by the way, we had a new CTO at the time. So everything was new for us. So we knew we had to do something quickly. We're pretty much a Microsoft shop. So Microsoft offered, of course, it cost us later, but try this for 30 days. Here's your risky sign-on. How about doing risky sign-on? At least that will start protecting you and you can be protected quickly. And what this did was basically say, any bad locations like Dubai or Nigeria, or any suspicious place that we know that hackers are coming from, or if somebody's traveling, let's say they're in New York and 30 minutes later they log in from LA, that's impossible. So we would block obvious outside logins for us. But what happened with that, it was really manually intensive. So if one of our board of supervisors wanted to travel, they would have to tell us or we'd block them. And so travel was actually, there was a lot of travel back then before the pandemic. So anyone that traveled would have to notify us and we'd have to manually work around it. It was just a pain. It was a pain for everyone. So by the end of that year, we decided to start our MFA journey. And our MFA journey was not quick. Even though we started in November of that year, it took about a year to get us fully rolled out, which I'll talk about later. But we decided that we would go with Office 365 MFA because, again, being a Microsoft shop, it seemed the easy thing to do. So we kept our risky sign-on while we went through our MFA process. And our MFA process, it was not easy back then and not easy at the beginning. For any of you that work with Microsoft, at the beginning when they are advertising their products, they may not be all that yet. There's still some bumps and there's still some things not worked out. So we had to work through that. We had to figure out what was our MFA going to look like? Was it going to be an authenticator app? Was it going to be a token? What was it going to look like? So a lot of that decisioning we had to make up front before we could even plan on how to go forward. And I'll talk about our rollout later. So we decided to go with Authenticator MFA, and we partnered with Dell and Microsoft. And the way Microsoft works, they were able to give us credits that we could work with Dell. So the whole analysis really didn't cost us anything, which was really nice and helped us decide what our strategy would be going forward. So that's what we decided with our endpoint and how we wanted to use MFA. And then, of course, on our infrastructure side, we were especially nervous about that, knowing that if somebody got into our environment and we would have a crawler, we need to make sure that we're secure there as well. Because if you look at the attacks like Atlanta, I think it happened with a open laptop in a fire station or something to that effect. And then they got in and they were able to move around. So we wanted to make sure not to get into those predicaments. So we chose actually Duo over Microsoft in this case because it was just less complicated and easier to use. We don't want to complicate our technology stack, but it seemed to be the right decision. And then we had a cybersecurity policy that helped us enforce it throughout the county. And just a little bit about the county, we're a federated IT department. So we have an enterprise IT department with about 200 people and about 20 departments throughout the county, and 5 of them have their own IT groups as well. We have the enterprise apps, they may have their business apps, but there's some overlap. So we needed a cybersecurity policy to help roll out the discipline, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So this is what we chose and why we chose it. And that began our journey. And I'll turn it back to Kim.
Fantastic, Sybil. Yeah, a lot there, right? In terms of having experienced an actual attack, going through selection process, different use cases, different methods, right? All things that we're all too familiar with if we've been through it, or in my case, I've just spent a lot of time with all various industries, but all different customers going through this exact challenge, right? And even before we just started the webinar, I was saying, you know, what's the barrier? Why can't we implement, you know, if it's the #1 priority, if it's the top thing, if it's you know, known to be something that's impactful to prevent attack, what's the challenges? And even at the NACo annual conference, right, a lot of folks that I talked to were using passwords. And so it was interesting. We just did a survey, so more from the industry perspective on what some of those barriers are. And that drove a lot of the content for today in terms of the practical steps where, you know, user adoption. Are people going to adopt it? Are they going to be willing to use it? I'm a big proponent of MFA is only as successful as it is actually adopted, right? It's not good if it never gets used. So that's probably one of the biggest areas of concern is the change management. Also privacy policy regulations, right? Even with those OTPs, the codes being sent to phones nowadays, there's all these regulations coming about paying for the phone plan and what do you do for methods. And then expensive, right? I'm a vendor, right? I'm on the vendor side. And so it does cost money to do this. And so how can you, and we'll talk about that too, how can you kind of be more cost effective? And as Rita said, start somewhere, you know, start with a point of implementation and go from there. And then just aren't sure how to use it or where to use it, right? We've seen that a lot where, okay, we'll just put it on VPN or we'll just put it on privileged accounts, right? And so how do you get to, as was recommended even at the conference, how do you get it on every single account, which is a challenge. I think the other thing that stands out is there's a lot of buzz in the market. There's a lot of terminology and content and just a lot of vendors, right? And so we all put information out there. We all talk about MFA, best practices, pick us, and it's confusing. And, you know, lately Zero Trust is a good example of that, where it's been harped on, it's been pushed. I think there's a lot of where do I start? How do I begin? MFA is a great place to start, but we're also hearing same thing, resources are limited to be able to implement that. And then finally, there was a great report by ISC Squared that was talking about the cybersecurity expertise gap and really the talent and skills shortage that we have, that it has gone down, but we're still at about a 3 million shortage in cybersecurity professionals. And so it is good to see a lot of educational institutions implementing cybersecurity programs, but still a long way to go in terms of the resources. And then, so turning it back, Sybil, to you and obviously to Rita, is what are some of specific to counties? What do you think are some of the major challenges you've seen over the years for being able to implement it? And what is maybe the hesitation that's maybe more specific to counties, or is it the same as what we saw in the survey?
Well, so
I'll turn to you. Sure.
So for us, as I mentioned, that we're federated. So one of our biggest challenges was getting everybody on the same page, whether it be with MFA and why we chose the MFA method we did, or whether it be any of the other security initiatives that we wanted to roll out. So, our challenges was getting everyone on board. And the things that we did to do that, we used actually friendly competition. We would put a report together that would be by department. How many people have BitLocker? How many people have MFA? How many people have a smart passwords? How many people have expiring passwords or whatever it was that we had at the time? And, put the friendly competition out there. And basically, the department heads would say, oh, the sheriff is doing better than I am. And they'd come back and they'd get mad at their IT teams, and their IT teams would get mad at us because we told their department heads. I mean, it was all a big vicious circle, but not one of them, because of the environment I described, no one wanted to say, yeah, we're not going to do anything. I mean, no one, that was not an option. And I think that was probably one of our, that really helped us move forward. So that was definitely one of the challenges for us, is more internal, was the adoption by everyone to whatever we were trying to roll out. And the other one is, the tools seem to change, and we seem to get smarter, and what seemed to make sense, like Risky Signon, which doesn't make sense at all now, made sense back then. And I think I was saying this to Rita yesterday. So how do we keep current? I mean, the tools keep changing. And or they're getting more mature, and the technology stack, and which way do you want to go? Even though we have a roadmap, we've got to, sometimes that roadmap's got to, we're going to take turns based on what the market is looking at. So, and you're asking about specific changes, and I think that I think actually what I just said makes sense as what I think the changes are. The changes in people, the adoption has very much changed. It was a fight at the beginning when I talk about 2018 and trying to get everyone on board. Now everybody is proud to lead the effort. They want to be secure. They don't want to be the one that brings us down. So I think that's a really positive change.
Well, and I agree with everything that Sybil said. The one piece that I will add, and it was posted in the chat, I think directly to me, is that in local government, we tend to have an older population of employees still. And we still have those employees who do not have a cell phone at all. Or, and I know flip phones still exist. So the pushback there is, well, I don't have a cell phone. So what am I going to do? And early on, that was the only method that was available to us, was the PIN, surprisingly, in terms of the solutions we were looking at. And then, of course, being asked to put it on their personal device was another one. Or, well, who's going to pay for those texts? A lot of folks don't have unlimited texting. That pushback in those areas is getting less and less. But when I talk to counties in rural areas, it's still a very big issue. And so I've been pushing for the fact that there's alternative ways to have the multi-factor now, not just the 4-digit PIN. And so I remind folks when I talk to them, even now when I'm on the banking site, it'll say, do you want us to send you the code in an alternate email or to your phone? And so there are other options that have alleviated some of that, at least that part of the concern, which addresses using the cell phone at all or using their personal device. And then you get the conversation of, well, I don't want to give you my personal email. And yet how many of those same staff, when they get, logged into the payroll account or something similar, that's what they put in there to get the other retirement information, things like that. So that's what I would add there, Kimberly, in terms of how have things changed. It's definitely a lot easier to require it to be mandatory now. You still have pushback from elected officials. I just read a recent article of, it was not a county council member, but a council member of a government entity. And by peer pressure, he eventually said, okay, but so it's the mandatory part, I think, is getting better. And with all the recent attacks and the change in the environment, making it mandatory has become a little easier.
Rita, I want to agree with that. We have 100% adoption. You either have MFA or you don't. You can get in or you can't. It's very clean cut. And it's funny because your electeds and your board of supervisors are the highest targets. And they were one of the last that we got on board, but we got them all on board. Again, the fear of being the one that brings in an attack is pretty strong. But they didn't like the change. And once they changed, they were fine. We don't even, in fact, they're now advocates for it. They're going out there and saying, make sure you're on MFA, make sure we're doing videos with them. They're all in now, but at the beginning, it was pretty tough. They were like our last people that we were able to convert.
Mhm.
Yeah, those champions, especially if you can get one or two. I have some background in healthcare, and clinicians, I would say, have taken the cake for the most difficult. As they used to cut off their smart cards and glue them into the readers in the UK and do all crazy things. But I think that other piece that I would highlight too is this migration or evolution of MFA. When it first came out, I don't know if you remember, it was financial only, and it
That's
was
right.
password, and it was questions. It was
Yeah.
both something you
Right.
know. And I was like, so then they re-architected the controls and said, actually, it's got to be something you know, something you have, something you are, and you can't just use two things you know. So they refactored it. And then you had in the industry, from the vendor perspective, you had the FIDO Alliance, and you had the big guys, the Google, the Microsoft, right, come in, and phone factor based became the way to go. And so what we're finding now is what you've highlighted along the way, which is you need options. Even, I mean, we're 16 different methods, what we support. It's not a plug for us. It's just literally what we've had to include and integrate because of all the scenarios you come across, right? And I think that's a really key part. We talk about how to select those in just a few minutes. And so I think from the goal today, right, we've talked about kind of what it is, what you need. Sybil, your story is fantastic as to like firsthand experience. And we wanted to make sure to provide everybody listening with a practical path, right? It's one thing to say like attacks are happening, you need MFA, but how do you get there? And one of the sparks for this, I was at the annual conference, I'll keep referencing it, but I was talking to somebody, I won't call out her name, but she was fantastic. She goes, listen, I just started putting in password expiration policy. And I was like, you know what, that's something, and you've started, and that's the place to start, because you have to start doing something to start putting in these security controls. So we wanted to give really a practical perspective and these 5 steps that you can follow along the way to get there. So as Sybil mentioned in reference, the first one that I start with is risk assessment and assessment in general. It's interesting, I worked in an organization that was actually a monitor of cybersecurity risk. And I was like, oh, risk and security are the same thing. And it's like, well, actually, you don't know what security you need until you know how risky you are, right? And so they go hand in hand, but are not the same. And so this is all about assessing your situation. And these are some examples of what IT risk assessments look like. It can be as simple as take all your assets, whether they're servers or applications or scenarios, and just rank them, put them in criticality, right? How important are they to the county and to operations, and what happens if they go out, and how can we solve it? And so that's just a high level assessment. Ideal scenario is you can inventory every single asset that you have, but also at a high level, mostly the big applications, the big devices, the servers, the infrastructure, at least get that down and start understanding where those weak spots are. And then the other assessment is to workflows, user workflows. So Rita, you made a great point. There are people that don't have cell phones. They don't have smartphones, right? And so what alternatives do you have for them? And if you haven't planned for that, then when you go to purchase a solution, it might be difficult to say, okay, this is what we're going to need for that user population. And then the last one I'll mention, I'll turn it over to Sybil, you and Rita for comments too, is the compliance and actually the cyber insurance requirements. So we're finding a lot, compliance is a big one, but believe it or not, this year has been a compelling event of cyber insurers starting to basically say, we are going to raise premiums, even double them, or not insure you at all if you don't have MFA. So it's just really important to get your landscape and your situation down, because otherwise you might just pick methods, or you might just implement a solution or try to get user adoption, just not have the full picture in place. Sybil, any thoughts there? Or I know you said you didn't have the assessment part down.
That was
when the attack happened, but
that's right. We were on fear, but we do have a security roadmap, and the security roadmap is designed around our what our risks are. And we look at it two ways. You asked what changed earlier. What used to be the security around the data center. We had the perimeter around the data center, and that's how we did our security, and that's how we decided what we wanted to do. Now, especially with the pandemic, we have what we call the hybrid workspace. Well, now the security's got to be around the individual. So what is that security around the individual? It's physical, it's network, it's MFA, it's all of those things. And based on that, we do our risk assessment, and then we decide, where we are in our roadmap and what we're going to do going forward. I feel like this is all we've actually been doing in the last 3 years. Like you talked about, whether it be passwords, whether it be MFA, whether it be BitLock, or whether it be patches, all of that, and you have to decide what you're going to do first and what you're going to hit first. And I've not been hit by the insurance issues. I heard that discussion yesterday. So now I'm thinking, do I reach out and ask, or do I wait for them to come to me?
And wait, So.
All right, because now I'm getting nervous. There was a big conversation about it yesterday, and it's like, uh-oh.
And I haven't seen any specifics on like what they require. I've also heard that the first, year, maybe this year you'll get the, hey, slap on the wrist, you should have. By next year, you're going to have an impact. But they're paying too much ransom. That's what it's come down to. Is I don't think they thought people would collect on these policies, which are hard to collect on. That's a whole other conversation. But I don't think they expected to pay out as much as they have been, and especially with 2020 just off the charts. So
yeah, you're so right, Kim. And it was a discussion on the Tech Exchange a week ago with IT directors and CIOs about, and it's coming. Sybil, I hate to say it, if you haven't heard it, they're coming for you. And it's turning into, I want to say, a nightmare. But they're many of the major carriers are now questioning whether they should even provide an option for cyber insurance. And Kim, your comment about they didn't expect there to be these many claims, that gets to their bottom line and the P&L. So I think that's a consideration. But my one comment I want to add, Sybil mentioned it, years ago, we only had to worry about the physical room, the physical building. I'll even go back, date myself, the physical file cabinet. And we knew where the data was. And now the landscape is so much larger. And in many cases, I wouldn't say it's nebulous, because eventually it's physical somewhere, kind of. It's in somebody else's building. But you can only protect what you know. And so what I don't know is what I don't know. And that I put it in the chat, data asset inventory. Yes, you want a complete one, but start somewhere. And I will say that was one of the things early on in our cyber insurance questionnaire. How many records do you have that would fall under this? And I'm like, really? Seriously? How do I calculate that? So, you did a little bit of analytical work and you gave a number. Well, that I think I have X number of records because I extrapolated out isn't going to fly anymore. You really have to be a little bit more focused on your methodology, but at least take those applications where you have data and data that needs to be protected. You don't need to protect everything. It's the back to the assessment, but you gotta have a data asset inventory. If you don't today, that's another takeaway from this webinar. So that's what I would add there, Kimberly. So back to you.
Yeah, no, great point. I think, again, that you got to start somewhere is probably going to be the theme for most of this conversation. The last thing I'll mention too is I did a lot of third-party risk management, product marketing and information at one of my roles. And same thing, the suppliers, right? The outsourcing. So we talked about moat and castle, right? We've all had it. I remember I was standing at the RSA conference and someone walked up to me and he goes, the perimeter is here. And he walked away. But it's true. That's as far as, the perimeter goes. There is no such thing. And now you have third party and suppliers involved. So just as much as you have the data asset inventory of your systems, it is important, get your critical providers down, right? Who are the main providers of technology that you're using, and just make sure you have good assessment, or at least, you know, SOC 2 compliance and all those good best practices for that as well. So we'll move on to step 2. So you've assessed, you've taken a landscape as best as you can, at least focus on the critical pieces. And then we're really getting into the next piece of this, which is, what methods do you use? I think it was great, Rita, and you know, I'll keep going back to that example you gave. We've heard it too, is like, this pool of users cannot use phones. Sometimes it's like no cell phone reception, or literally we have some groups we've worked with can't bring it in because it's actually forbidden because they were taking pictures of data, right? Like, you know, insider problems. And so just as a reminder out there, so it is always 2 things, discrete things, right? Something you know, something you have, and something you are. And depending on the person and who they are, like an employee or a citizen, that might change wildly. So like a police officer is here, right? We've used fingerprint because that's something that's very quick. They can put it down, but it's also, how much do you have to know that person truly is who they say they are? Not just the token or the phone is present, or, you know, a code's been typed in, versus somebody that's working from home may not have critical access, right, to sensitive data. They might be fine using an SMS one-time passcode or an email code or anything. Or people that are of an older age, we have printed codes. You can literally print them out and cross them off, right? And so it's about mix and matching and flexibility and options. And I think, Sybil, your point on Microsoft and Duo, a lot of companies, organizations I talk to are in the dozen range for how many providers they've built, because as MFAs, you know, basically evolved, oh shoot, you know, phone's not enough for this use case, or I'll buy hardware tokens, or this
Right.
one's not enough, so then I'll bring in, you know, whatever. And then biometrics is a lot of our differentiation, and that's just had a hard time coming up in popularity. And now we have Touch ID and Face ID and other things. So it's interesting because it's no one size fits all. You have to look at who you're trying to give this to and what works for them. What's the best thing that you can give them as a method? So Sybil, any other thoughts there from actually having handed some of these things off to your employees and users?
No, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but consistency, whatever you choose, and whether we use the Authenticator app, and we basically say, if you don't want to use it, then you don't get to work from home. So, you know, there's some carrots that we have now, but I would just be consistent, whatever you decide. It gets too confusing if you have too many different products.
Yeah, we give, the other thing I'll say too is, if you can, and not just BioKey, there's probably other solutions out there that do it, but give the user an option. So always have like a fallback, and you'll see that sometimes, like, I don't have my phone with me. Oh, I can use this method instead.
Right.
So it's good to have kind of that fallback, or the emergency out, right? If they just don't have that hardware tokens are notoriously lost. What if I don't have my hardware token? What happens? So it's good from that perspective. Rita, any thoughts there on common methods or things you've also seen for MFA?
No, I agree with everything that's being said. Really nothing to add on this particular area or this particular step.
Great. And just, last point I'll make is, when we did look at security to least secure, passwords are least secure, probably goes without saying, most secure hardware tokens, authenticator apps like Microsoft, Google, and biometrics. So, you know, if you're looking, again, based on the scenario, you know, put the most security in place that's required. So, all right. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sybil, you, for this step, because you just had such an amazing approach to it, right? And so just the next step is really defining your security policies. After all this assessment and picking methods, right, it's really the security policies you set and maintain and everything that enforces it. So can you just talk a little bit about how you approached it and what security policies you have in place?
Yeah, so we discovered that even though we had grand plans, we had a digital transformation and our security roadmap, that not all departments were going to agree that they wanted to do this. We wanted to do, you know, Microsoft, someone else might want to do Duo, but we knew that that wasn't a good to get a policy like cybersecurity across, but we did. And I would say that it was one of the smartest things we did, because all the change we wanted to introduce in the last 3 years, which is actually tremendous if you think about even what you guys have all gone through, this policy has been incredibly helpful. I mean, it basically said department head, you're responsible for making sure that your departments are secure by following what IT says that we need to do. It gave authority to our CIO and the county administrator to say, you set the policy, the roadmaps, you determine the tools, everyone else has to come on board, but it's your responsibility. We wanted, as I mentioned earlier, consistent behavior across the county. We didn't want one department to be doing one way, another doing it the other, or one department saying, I don't have to, and all of that. So it has to be consistent across the county. And then it recognized that all employees play a key role in the safety. So they have to get their cybersecurity awareness training. They have to make sure their work environments are secure. They have to, watch the videos, et cetera. And if we do it right, they want to be able to do that. So this policy then gave us the ability that when we said we're going to BitLocker or we're going to have smart passwords, we're actually now going to Windows Hello, that everyone has to come on board. You don't get to opt out. And no one wants central IT to be big brother, right? So that's the tough part. That's where the rub comes in. So we've developed committees where we get together and we talk about what we're doing, and it's no longer a surprise, and communicating with our partners so that we can roll this out. And the policy has really, for those folks that just don't want to come on board, it ends up being our stick. It's like, here it is. If you don't want to if you don't want to roll out BitLocker, then have your department head go to the board and ask not to do it. Well, we haven't had a single one do that. No one's going to go to the board and say, I don't want to play. So it has been very, very successful for us. I recommend a good policy.
And Sybil, just I'll put you on the spot a little bit, but how long is this document? Like if you were to look at your security policy and read it end to end.
It's actually, if you include the board letter, it's only about 5-6 pages.
Okay. Because it's good. Like people, sometimes security policies, I've had people be like, they're kind of mythical things. Like, I'm not sure what that is, and so
no, they're very precise.
Document.
It's very precise. If I remove the board letter, it's like 4 pages. Yeah. There's the pomp and circumstance that you have to put in policies, but there's some real stuff in there too.
And then do you have every new hire employee? Is that part of what they're like? How did the adoption of that policy happen? Do you make everybody read it? Is it only part of the department heads enforcing it, or how did you roll out the policy?
Yeah, I would say that the policy is definitely at the department head level, and it's at the IT level. And part of our onboarding processes is some, technology use protocols that people have to follow. And then they have the training every year. And then we do, and I know we're short on time, but we also do, October is our big cybersecurity awareness month.
Right.
So everyone is involved.
Right. Yeah, no, that's and we're getting the communication. And then in terms of policies are you setting them in Active Directory? From an administrative perspective on the IT side, there's also the actual setting of technical security policies. So we have a security policy configurator, but I'm assuming you have an admin doing that and putting those things in place as well.
Oh, yes, we do. Yeah. And we've been consolidating. We had 11 different Active Directories. We're consolidating it into one. We're getting rid of, admin access, because that's a big risk. All of those projects are going on in the background as well.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah, I think it's just important because it's a lot of times we talk security policies just on the tech side, but you have this very concrete document, doesn't have to be extensive, but it's clear about what the approach is and agreement is. So I think that's fantastic. And hand in hand with that goes with the communication strategy. So
Kimberly, before you go
ahead, Rita. Yeah, sure.
Sybil, I need to make sure we have that on our Tech Exchange portal. I think we do, but if you don't mind sending that to me afterwards.
Okay, will do.
And then the other thing that in talking about this, it just reminded me, the policies is great, and knowing that you have a team that's implementing the policy, and maybe you believe you're fully implemented, but you get new employees and new IT employees. I just made a note to myself, it's good to get a periodic update on this, whether this is actually all in place or not, from your network engineer or your IT director, even administrator. network administrator, whoever handles that, because I would bet you money, something somewhere is not following 100%. And it's not,
without a doubt.
yeah.
Mhm.
So just a refresher for everyone. And since it's October, coming up here in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, that's probably a good thing to just say, hey, run this tool for me. Tell me who might not be compliant.
Oh, I can't share the story because it shows a big hole we found, but we found a big hole just recently. So you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I would say all these steps are not points in time. Maybe that's a good way to put it too. It's like all of these things aren't just do it once and leave, right? Like
That's right.
you should
Okay.
continuously assess and policy driven. So
Before you leave there, Amy Middendorf has a question.
sure.
She has posted, and we're a little short on time, so let me ask it. Does your policy only address the network security, or does it address training and data security? And do you put the policies IT needs to follow separate? And that's a good point, because I actually have a separate IT acceptable use policy that our IT department signs off on.
Right. This is the overarching policy that basically says IT and the county administrator has authority in all things security. Then there'll be smaller policies or guidelines on specifically what your passwords are, specifically what your endpoint looks like. So there would be other usually guidelines to match, roll up to the policy.
We might have to do a separate session, Sybil, on
Yeah.
just how you've structured all of that.
I
That's
want to
right.
see it. I want to see that. Like we talk about them so much, but to see someone's actual policies, is excellent. So,
Okay.
All right.
all right. So Sybil, I'll turn it back to you for communication strategy, because a lot of this, I know my first question after talking about the policy was, wait, so the board was on board, and you're like,
Oh, yeah.
well, it took some communicating.
That's right. That's right. It did. We're actually giving them an update in a week. I'm going to just say this really quickly, and this is MFA specific. It's almost everything we do specific, but you can't communicate enough. And we communicate, and someone will still say, but I didn't hear about it. It's like, how? We told everybody. And I mean, we have this thing where we have to start with the department heads, what I told you earlier, and then the department IT teams, and one over the other, and who goes first. But, we have our hierarchy. We need to make sure everybody knows. Because of the disasters that happened in 2018, we actually did a roadshow to go out and tell people what was happening in the community and with Atlanta. So we had no arguments going forward when we got to MFA. We created guidelines. We created communication protocols. We would make sure that when we were going to actually do the MFA turnover, we did it by department, that we sent, emails a week in advance, a day in advance, on the day. We had people standing by to help. We had people ready to do questions. And then we did a survey. How did we do? What could we do differently? And then we would do that for the next rollout. It took us a year to actually roll it out to all the departments, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So we had lots of time to get better and better and better as we go. But communication was just the most important thing that we did. And what we learned on this, we've actually been using on all of our other rollouts. So anyway, communicate. That's what this is.
Yeah. I think that's, I had originally too, like, you're kind of in marketing, like, welcome to my world of
Absolutely.
run a webinar. It takes 3 reminders. They're going to sign up the day before, but it's, and know your audience. And I think the other thing I would point out, I've seen work really well is, just kind of the marketing best practices, know who you're talking to, but what matters to them. It's one thing to say like, hey, you need to be compliant and put MFA in place. If you're talking to somebody that doesn't know why that's important or what their responsibility is. And I think, Sybil, you've just highlighted that you've made people a part of this movement almost, right?
That's right.
What it feels like is everybody has a stake, everybody has the responsibility. Right. And so there's like a heroic feeling, I guess, to like,
there is,
do your part, do your part. So,
that's right. Be cyber smart.
See, yeah, I like it.
Well, just one quick thing I would add here, and that is the fact that it all boils down to relationships. Many of us have been through the Professional Development Academy Leadership Program, and there's a really big emphasis there about getting to know your department heads as much as you can, elected officials, county administrator, and building the relationship now, like you may be brand new, you might have been there a couple years, build that relationship now before you have to bring things like this to them. Because you have credibility and you have that you've already been communicating, and now you're putting something tough in front of them, and the rapport is much better, and the outcome is much better as well.
Yep. Yeah, we used to pick when we worked with customers. I just worked with customers for years. We'd be like, all right, who's the person that's not going to want to adopt this? Like the head doctor, the county commissioner, whatever it may be. We're going to make them our best friend and our champion. And that was the goal we set out a lot of times, because if you can get that person to do it, they actually end up having a lot of clout and respect within even the community that you're trying to get it into. Get that one person to be your advocate in the face of the change. And that's helped a lot too. And then so Sybil, staying with kind of your story and what we've seen, I've seen this too, is like phased rollout, and I think this goes back to starting somewhere. And even if it's on your privileged accounts, right? Even if it's on VPN, as we saw in the poll, you're starting somewhere. And so just talk a little bit about, how did you do that, your phased approach? What do you recommend, and any lessons learned that you may have?
Right. So you can see it, eat your own dog food. We always start with IT. Like I said, we have about 200 people in the central IT department. It's the perfect place to start. On the downside, our desktops are typically different than the rest of the county because we have something that they don't. We experienced an issue with that recently, but start with your own department. We actually did our whole rollout plan with our IT department. First, we did the execs, and then we did everyone else, but we used all the materials, all the communication plan, everything that we had done to see how it worked. And then we can use those key learnings to help with the departments. We then went after friends and families, those friendly departments or early adopters that we know they will be a little bit forgiving if we, make some mistakes. And that was how we kind of chose the order of the departments. Smaller departments first, larger departments. Our largest department has 2,500 people. That department, that's our social services department. We broke up into about 4 different groups. But the method that we chose, we used for every single one of them. So it was rinse and repeat. So we would start with a pilot group in each department, because you don't know if MFA is going to break any application. Everyone has their unique ways of doing things. So we wanted to be sure that we understood what the staff would go through and what the impact would be before we rolled it out to the larger department. So we did that consistently. And then, like I said, any of our key learnings, then we did it again. You can't underestimate user adoption. And I've heard the questions and people talking about it throughout this experience. I think MFA is one of those where you need to really be empathetic. You need to understand what that user experience is. Some people are tech savvy and will get it, some won't. You need to know what they're going through. And then you need to share that. And one of the examples I want to give is native email. In our case, your native email, I used to be able to do my county email and my Gmail all in the native email account on my Apple phone, and I loved it. I just went through my mail. I mean, I was sold on it. And when they gave me my MFA and they took away my county email from my native email, and I now had to use Outlook, I was pissed. It's like, really? I have to go to 2 places to do my mail. And it made me angry, and I hated it. By the way, now I love it. I think it's like fantastic. But when I went out and was being the champion for this project, I could go out and tell people that. Before they told me they hated it, I could already tell them that I hated it and why I hated it. So I already diffused them before they could get all over my case about this. So was really understanding what their experience is and making sure the IT teams and everyone that was supporting them knew what that was so that they could go out and be there. We would keep people for about 3 days after we transition people to answer questions and be helpful and just listen, because most of it's just whining because it's a change. But that I think really helped us. And as people got used to it, they told other people, and then we couldn't keep up. Now we had more and more departments that wanted to get on board, and we couldn't move fast enough to get them all done. And then maybe at the end we had like 3 holdouts, but we got them too. So anyways, it was good. It was a good project.
Yeah, I don't know who likes MFA. I don't like using MFA. I mean, I say we have to have it, and I use it all the time. I don't like it. I mean, like that, and I think that's right. That's the
so start with that, and then scare them to death about bringing the county down, and then you're good.
Right. The other thing I'd say, so I think phased rollout's huge. The other thing I always go with people, everybody, it's either been security and usability, security and convenience, whatever you want to call it, but put other things in place. So we have, single sign-on is a fantastic way to consolidate to one very secure login. So yes, it's a little more painstaking, but it's one time. And then you can at least get into multiple applications. Of course, if something's very sensitive, you can step up and require more authentication at that point. But, that's a nice way to give people, adoption incentives, is we'll eliminate the amount of passwords you got to manage.
Right.
Self-service options, like I forgot passwords or I can't do things, or like I said, give people like 2 options. I forgot my hardware token, so today I can use my authenticator app, right? To give them a little bit of leeway when possible. Obviously, for those really critical situations, you're not gonna be able to do that. So, all right. Okay, so I'm going to put up all 5 steps real quick. Good to have it all. Obviously, we said we'd send out the slides, so you'll have all this information. But 1, assess your situation. 2, pick the right authentication methods for who the person is and what their workflows are. Define the security policies. Maybe a whole nother session on that at some point, sounds like. Communicate. You cannot over communicate. And phased rollouts and user adoption. Really work with people to get this in place. All right. So Rita, I will turn it over to you in just one second. I think we talked about step 1, start somewhere, start with the assessment, and then I'll turn it over to you to just go through some of these resources that are fantastic for folks.
Sure. And we'll share this PowerPoint afterwards. The URLs are right there in case someone wants to type them in real quick or just Google the title there. But I always recommend the Center for Internet Security. Many of you are familiar with the controls and benchmarks. That's for your IT person. This second one, anybody, I encourage you to go to that page. CISA, which is your cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. They just redesigned their whole website, and it's fabulous to get to tools and information now. And they actually have a document called "What Are Bad Practices?" Let me tell you, it's one of, yeah, exactly, Kevin, 1, 2, and 3. Single factor authentication is bad. That is on their list. And there's a thing about passwords as well. It's great to be able to show that to your elected officials. This is, take the screenshot, take the URL, put that in your PowerPoint. NIST, of course, has a wealth of information on MFA. It gets a little bit more in the weeds. And then I came across a really nice article from Microsoft about implementing MFA. And then finally, we have some great conversations, almost every day on the NACo Tech Exchange. If your IT person is not a member, I highly encourage you to give that slide to them and let them click on that link and join. But for today, we're just about out of time. I saw some questions as we went, and just want to double check here. If there's, I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank Kimberly Johnson and Sybil Gurney from Alameda County. You guys did a great job today sharing. And BioKey does have some information and some potentially helpful resources there. Encourage you to check them out. And we're always, all of us, accessible through email if you have questions or want additional information in any of these areas. Sybil or Kim, any last words?
No, it was great. It was great meeting with everyone.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to put this together. Yeah. I think the mantra, whether you're sitting there and you're the one person IT person or a team of 200, like start somewhere, pick a critical area and try to roll it out. I think hesitation is what we're seeing, and we know it's time. So yeah, start somewhere. Any
progress is much better than no progress.
You got it.
All right, we will follow up once the Zoom recording has done its thing, and I get the link that it's ready. We'll send out a follow up to all of you today. Thank you for attending, and watch for more information on other opportunities for information sharing. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.